An open-air stage in the California sky. June of 1967. More than 7,000 people watch, mesmerized as a thin man, dressed in a psychedelic orange and green jacket, kneels before his guitar. The Fender Stratocaster lies on the ground, emitting distorted howls that seem to come from another world. The man sprays clear liquid onto the instrument. A match falls. Flames erupt. The crowd screams, some rise to their feet. But the guitarist doesn't flee the fire. He leans toward it, as if worshipping it, extracting the last tortured notes from his burning guitar. It's a ritual, a sacrifice. And the world of music will never be the same again. That man is James Marshall Hendrix. Jimmy to the world. And what just happened at the Monterey Pop Festival isn't just an act of showmanship. It's the most violent and beautiful declaration that the rules of rock have been shattered forever. But here's the paradox that haunts every genius. How did a musician without formal education, who could barely read sheet music, who never had teachers of classical technique, manage to expand the vocabulary of the electric guitar more than any other instrumentalist in the history of rock? Conservatory-trained guitarists, virtuosos with decades of study, jazz musicians with profound harmonic knowledge, none achieved what Hendrix did in just 4 years of his recording career. From 1966 to 1970, he completely redefined what an electric guitar could do, what it could sound like, what emotions it could convey. To understand the revolution, we must return to the silence that preceded it, to the world before Hendrix. The electric guitar in 1966 was a relatively young instrument. Amplifiers were square boxes that musicians treated with timid reverence. Distortion was considered a mistake, a defect in the equipment. When it occurred accidentally on recordings, the engineers apologized. Guitarists sought clean, crystalline, controlled sounds. Chuck Berry plays with revolutionary energy but pure tones. The Beatles experiment but within safe parameters. Eric Clapton, already considered a guitar god in England, plays impeccable but conservative electric blues. Jeff Beck begins to explore strange territories. Pete Townshend destroys guitars in acts of punk rebellion. But nobody, absolutely nobody, treats the electric guitar the way Hendrix is about to treat it, as an infinite sonic laboratory where is welcome, where feedback is music, where the amplifier is part of the instrument itself. Seattle, Washington. 1942. James Marshall Hendrix is born on November 27 in the midst of World War II. His father, Al Hendrix, is serving in the army. His mother, Lucille, struggles with alcoholism and instability. Jimmy's childhood is a fragmented landscape: foster homes, persistent poverty, the painful absence of family structure. But there is music. There is always music. Blues on the radio, rhythm and blues in the neighborhood bars, nascent rock and roll on other people's record players. Young Jimmy, not yet Jimmy, doesn't have his own guitar. He plays with a broomstick, then with a $5 ukulele. Finally, at 15, his father buys him a second-hand acoustic guitar. The boy is left-handed in a world designed for right-handed people. Instead of learning left-handed guitar or completely flipping the instrument and changing the strings, he develops his own hybrid technique. He plays right-handed guitars upside down, with the strings in the opposite order. This disadvantage will become part of his unique sound. There are no formal teachers. There are no structured lessons. Hendrix's conservatory is the rhythm and blues clubs, the Chitlin circuit stages, the circuit of venues for African American audiences where American segregation confines black talent. For years, Hendrix was an anonymous backing guitarist. He played behind Little Richard, behind the Isley Brothers, behind Curtis Knight. He was brilliant, but too conspicuous. Little Richard fired him for stealing the spotlight. Other bandleaders did the same. The young guitarist couldn't hold back. He couldn't just play backing chords. His guitar needed to speak, to shout, to sing with its own voice. 1966. New York. Hendrix plays in small Greenwich Village clubs under the name Jimmy James. His style is still too much for most. But not for everyone. A club called Café Wa? In the bohemian heart of Manhattan. Chas Chandler, former bassist of The Animals, a British invasion band that conquered the charts with House of the Rising Sun, is in New York looking for talent to manage. Someone mentions a wild guitarist who plays in Greenwich Village. Chandler enters Café Wa and witnesses something breathtaking. A slender, intense man coaxing sounds from his guitar that seem to come from the future. Not just playing notes, but sculpting entire soundscapes. Chandler knows immediately that he is witnessing something unprecedented. He approaches him after the show. The conversation is brief but historic. Chandler offers to take him to London, introduce him to the British music scene, and get him a record deal. Hendrix accepts. In September 1966, he boards a plane to England with $20 in his pocket and a battered guitar. He doesn't know that in less than a year he will be considered the best guitarist on the planet. He can't imagine that he will completely redefine his instrument. He can't predict that his name will be forever etched as synonymous with sonic revolution. But the fire is already burning inside him. And London is about to burn. London. September 1966. The city vibrates with musical energy. The Beatles have released Revolver. The Rolling Stones dominate blues rock. Cream, the supergroup with Eric Clapton, is forming. The competition is fierce, the level is incredibly high. Chandler works quickly. He places ads seeking musicians to form a band around Hendrix. Noel Redding, a red-haired guitarist, appears, but Chandler convinces him to switch to bass. Mitch Mitchell, a jazz drummer with extraordinary technical skills, arrives. The lineup is perfect, a flexible rhythm section that can keep up with Hendrix's unpredictable improvisations. The band's name, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. There's no ambiguity about who the star is. The rehearsals begin. Hendrix teaches his songs, strange compositions that blend blues, rock, nascent psychedelia, and something entirely new. Hey Joe, a song about murder and betrayal. Purple Haze, with its impossible, alien riff. The Wind Cries Mary, an ethereal ballad that demonstrates Hendrix is not only power but also delicacy. But it's live where the real magic explodes. The debut. A small French club in London. October 1966. The audience is small but includes musicians, journalists, and people connected to the scene. Hendrix takes the stage with his white Stratocaster. He wears flamboyant clothes, unlike anything the British rock scene has ever seen. And then he starts to play. The volume is aggressive. The distortion isn't accidental but intentional, sculpted. Hendrix doesn't just play with his fingers. He uses his teeth to pluck notes while his hands execute another melodic line. He plays behind his head without losing precision. He rubs the guitar against the amplifier, generating controlled feedback that becomes melody. But these are not empty circus tricks. Every extravagant gesture serves the music. The physical contortions extract sounds no one has ever heard before. Theatricality is inseparable from sonic innovation. The audience is stunned. Some musicians present feel they are witnessing the future. Others feel their own music has just become obsolete. News travels fast in the closed circuit of London's musical elite. Within days, legendary guitarists are attending Hendrix shows in tiny clubs. Pete Townsend goes. Jeff Beck goes. Eric Clapton, the guitar god, goes. And Clapton comes out devastated. There's an anecdote that would become legendary. After seeing Hendrix, Clapton returned to his apartment and seriously considered giving up the guitar. He felt that everything he had achieved, all his technical mastery, all his reputation, had been eclipsed in a single night by this unknown American. It's not childish insecurity. It's the honest recognition that Hendrix has taken the electric guitar into entirely new territory. He doesn't just play better, he plays differently. He has expanded the very vocabulary of the instrument. But this is just the beginning. Monterey in Flames is 8 months away. The groundbreaking albums are yet to come. The global influence has yet to be unleashed. How did a musician with no formal training, who learned in second-rate clubs, who was fired for being too flashy, who arrived in London with no reputation or money, manage in such a short time to completely redefine the possibilities of the electric guitar? The answer lies not only in his technique, not only in his creativity, not solely in his perfect historical timing. The answer lies deeper. Something that combines technology, intuition, culture, risk, and an almost mystical understanding that music doesn't live in the strings, but in the space between sound and silence. A hotel room in London. December 1966. The air is thick with the smell of cigarettes and hot wires. Hendrix is alone, surrounded by amplifiers, effects pedals, and guitars in various states of tuning. He's not resting between shows. He's working. Other guitarists practice scales, perfect techniques, memorize solos. Hendrix does something radically different. He experiments with pure sound. He plugs his guitar into multiple amplifiers simultaneously. He places microphones at odd angles. He manipulates knobs until he finds distortions that his engineers consider wrong. This is his true secret genius. Hendrix understands something most of his contemporaries don't. The electric guitar isn't simply an amplified acoustic guitar. It's an entirely new instrument whose sound is created by the interaction of strings, magnetic pickups, electrical circuits, and tube amplifiers. He doesn't play electric guitar. He plays electricity itself. To understand Hendrix's revolution, we must understand his technological arsenal. Not because technology created his genius, but because he understood how to liberate it from its limitations. His main guitar, a Fender Stratocaster. Specifically, he prefers mid-60s models, with their distinctive double cutaway design and 3 single-coil pickups. But Hendrix doesn't play it conventionally. As a left-handed player using right-handed guitars turned upside down, the reversed string configuration creates different tensions and unique resonances. Next comes the effects chain. In 1966, effects pedals were in their infancy. Fuzz, aggressive distortion achieved by clipping the signal, was new and experimental. The wah-wah, with its distinctive vocal wah, barely existed commercially. Hendrix takes these childlike devices and transforms them into sophisticated, expressive instruments. The wah-wah pedal in his hands is not a novelistic effect. It is an extension of his voice, allowing him to make the guitar cry, scream, whisper. But there's one name that few people know, an electrical engineer named Roger Mayer. Mayer works for the British Admiralty developing acoustic measurement equipment for submarines. His daytime work involves sound wave physics, frequency analysis, and signal manipulation. By night, he builds experimental effects pedals for guitarists. When Hendrix and Mayer met in late 1966, it was a perfect synergy. Hendrix had sonic ideas no one had ever heard before. Mayer had the technical knowledge to bring them to life. Together they created modified versions of fuzz pedals, designed custom circuits that produced specific distortions, and experimented with configurations manufacturers had never imagined. The Octavia is perhaps his most distinctive creation. A pedal that doubles the input frequency, creating a ghostly, almost synthetic octave sound. Hendrix uses it on Purple Haze and on the legendary solo in One Rainy Wish. That alien sound, which seems to come from a synthesizer even though it's purely processed electric guitar, becomes part of the Hendrix vocabulary. But perhaps Hendrix's most radical innovation doesn't involve pedals. It involves pure volume. Marshall amplifiers. Black towers of British power with simple controls but brutal sonic capability. In 1966, most guitarists played at moderate volumes. Amplifiers were designed to reproduce the guitar's sound cleanly, without coloration. Hendrix cranks everything up to the max literally. All the controls at 10. Marshall tube amps, when pushed beyond their clean capabilities, naturally begin to distort. But it's not raw, ugly distortion. It's a rich, harmonically complex saturation that adds endless sustain and a creamy texture. And then there's feedback. When an amplified guitar is placed near its own amplifier, the sound waves from the speaker cause the strings to vibrate, creating a feedback loop that can become an uncontrollable squeal. Sound engineers hate feedback. Conservative guitarists desperately avoid it. Hendrix tames it. He controls it with his body, moving the guitar toward and away from the amplifier, creating feedback in specific tones that blend musically. In his hands, feedback isn't a technical error. It's an expressive effect equivalent to a sustained note on a violin, but with timbral characteristics impossible on acoustic instruments. Olympic Studios, London. February 1967. The Jimi Hendrix Experience is recording their first album, Are You Experienced? The engineer is Eddie Kramer, a South African with an exceptional ear and an open mind. Kramer immediately understands that Hendrix isn't simply trying to document his live sound. He wants to use the recording studio as an additional instrument. Techniques that Hendrix and Kramer developed together would become standard decades later, but in 1967 they were radical, multi-track recording where Hendrix recorded multiple guitar parts that intertwined into textures impossible to replicate live, extreme panning, where different instruments jumped between the left and right stereo speakers, creating spatial movement, and tape reverse, where Hendrix recorded a solo, then played it back in reverse, creating otherworldly melodies. Are You Experienced? The title track ends with sound effects that seem to pull you into another dimension. Processed guitars, reversed vocals, controlled feedback loops. It's more than rock. It's musique concrete, sonic experimentation of the kind that avant-garde composers like Karlheinz Stockhausen explored in European conservatories. But Hendrix makes it danceable. He makes it cool. He makes it commercial without artistic compromise. Herein lies the secret that separates Hendrix from mere virtuoso technicians. His technology always serves emotion, never replaces it. Other guitarists accumulate effects like collectors. Hendrix uses each tool with a specific narrative purpose. The wah-wah in Voodoo Child, Slight Return, isn't decoration. It's the voice of confidence, of swagger, of masculine assertion. The gentle distortion in Little Wing isn't aggression. It's warmth, nostalgia, electric tenderness. His solos aren't displays of finger speed. They're complete emotional conversations. Tentative introduction, development of tension, cathartic climax, peaceful resolution. Every note is charged with intention. This is what technical analyses always miss. You can catalog every pedal he used, every amp setting, every studio technique. But without his profound musical sensitivity, without his intuition about when to explode and when to whisper, technology is just noise. There is a connection that rock history frequently ignores. Hendrix and jazz. Before rock, before London, Hendrix played behind rhythm and blues artists who employed jazz musicians. He absorbed the harmonic freedom of jazz, the conversational improvisation, the concept that a solo is not a memorized repetition but a spontaneous creation. Charlie Christian, the pioneer of electric guitar in jazz during the 1930s and 40s, is an acknowledged influence on Hendrix. Christian demonstrated that the electric guitar could be a leading melodic instrument, not just rhythmic accompaniment. Wes Montgomery, with his thumb-playing technique that creates a smooth, round tone, is another influence. But Hendrix also listened to John Coltrane, the saxophonist whose modal and spiritual explorations were expanding the boundaries of jazz in the 1960s. Coltrane sought transcendence through sound, striving for altered states of consciousness through repetition, intensity, and the gradual buildup of tension to ecstasy. Hendrix translates that philosophy to electric guitar. His extended jams, especially live, are not simply long solos. They are spiritual journeys where music becomes meditation, ritual, a collective trance. Let's return to a specific moment. London, March of 1967. A club called Bag O' Nails. Hendrix is playing a late-night set. Among the audience, Paul McCartney, John Lennon, Eric Clapton, Pete Townsend. The cream of British rock royalty. Hendrix delivers a devastating rendition of Wild Thing. A simple rock song by the Troggs, transformed into a 10-minute sonic epic. During the climax, Hendrix kneels before his Marshall amplifier, guitar pressed against the speaker cloth, controlling feedback in waves that seem to breathe. The Beatles watch in awe. Their own album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, is due for release in June, revolutionizing studio production. But what Hendrix is doing live, without multi-track recording or editing, is equally revolutionary. He's pushing the boundaries of real-time performance. Clapton, who had seen Hendrix before, observes how other elite British guitarists react with the same mixture of admiration and devastation he experienced. It's a collective psychological turning point. Everyone understands that Hendrix isn't competition. He's in a new league. But a practical question arises: how do you learn what Hendrix does? The uncomfortable answer: it's not learned. Or more precisely, it's not learned solely through traditional instruction. Hendrix couldn't clearly explain his technique. When journalists asked him how he achieved his sounds, his answers were vague, poetic, and useless to aspiring technicians. "I simply feel the music," he said. Or, "the guitar tells me what to play." This isn't false mysticism. It's the truth of someone whose ability is fundamentally intuitive. Hendrix thinks in sound, not theory. He hears colors, he sees music. His creative process is synesthetic, blending senses. This frustrates formally trained musicians who seek to decipher his method. There is no codable method. There are only thousands of hours of experimentation, of error, of accidental discovery transformed into intentional technique. But there's a hidden cost to this experimental intensity. Amplifiers at maximum volume are brutally loud. Hendrix plays without hearing protection in rehearsals, recordings, and shows. Constant exposure to damaging sound levels begins to take its toll. His hearing gradually deteriorates. And there's another cost: impossible expectations. Every show, every recording, Hendrix had to surpass his own previous innovation. The audience expected to be constantly surprised. Other guitarists sought to copy his tricks, forcing him to invent new ones. It's an expectation machine that will eventually consume him. But in 1967, at this moment of unstoppable ascent, the future seems infinitely bright. Technological experiments continue. The boundaries of sound keep expanding. And the world has yet to see its true masterpiece. Monterey awaits. And with it, the moment when Hendrix will not only play revolutionary music, but where it will literally burn the past to give birth to the future. Los Angeles Airport, June 1967. Jimi Hendrix steps off the plane and onto American soil after 9 months in Europe. He is an absolute star in England, 3 singles in the British top 10, his first album climbing the charts. But in his own country, in America, he remains an unknown. The irony is bitter. The African-American guitarist who is redefining rock was ignored by the American music industry until British validation made him impossible to ignore. Now he returns not as a starving expat but as a foreign conqueror, bringing European credentials as his passport to American relevance. The Monterey International Pop Music Festival will be their reintroduction, their declaration, their baptism of fire in every possible sense. Monterey, California. A coastal county 2 hours south of San Francisco. June 16 to 18, 1967. The festival is ambitious, the first major rock festival in the United States, designed to legitimize rock music as serious art, not just teenage entertainment. The lineup is historic. The Who, the destructive British band known for smashing instruments. Janis Joplin, the Texan blues rock singer with a heart-wrenching voice. The Mamas and the Papas, architects of the Californian folk pop sound. Otis Redding, a giant of Southern soul. Ravi Shankar, the Indian sitar master who is introducing Eastern music to Western audiences. And Hendrix, the unknown American-British guitarist that nobody in the United States has heard of, but whom all the British musicians present consider the best guitarist on the planet. Paul McCartney personally recommended Hendrix for the festival. The organizers trusted him. Now Hendrix must justify that trust to a skeptical American audience. Backstage, hours before the show, Hendrix argues with Chas Chandler and his crew. The Who will play before the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Pete Townshend has already announced that he will destroy his guitar at the end of the set. It's his trademark, his act of primal punk rebellion. Hendrix faces a dilemma. How do you outdo someone who physically destroys their instrument? How do you make your performance more memorable than cathartic violence? The answer he finds is not more violence. It is ritual transformation. He will not destroy the guitar in adolescent rage. He will sacrifice it. He will offer it to the gods of rock in a modern pagan ceremony. Someone suggests burning the guitar. The idea is absurd, dangerous, probably illegal. Perfect. Sunday afternoon, June 18th. The Who take the stage while the Californian sun still warms the earth. Pete Townshend with his prominent nose and aggressive attitude. Keith Moon, the manic drummer. John Entwistle, the stoic bassist. Roger Daltrey, the singer with leather fringe, twirling his microphone like a weapon. They play My Generation with genuine generational fury. During the climax, Townshend repeatedly smashes his guitar against the amplifiers. The neck cracks. Townshend destroys what's left. Moon kicks his drum kit, creating a catastrophic crash. The audience is electrified, some terrified. It's real sonic violence. Destruction as an artistic statement. How can you follow that act? Hendrix and his band wait backstage. Mitch Mitchell is nervous. Noel Redding obsessively checks his bass. Hendrix is still, focused, in a mental place his bandmates cannot penetrate. He dresses with ritualistic care. A psychedelic jacket, bright orange and green, an explosion of color. A red scarf around his neck. Tight pants. A white Fender Stratocaster with gold accents. It's not rock and roll attire. It's the armor of a modern shaman. The presenter announces, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Hendrix walks toward the stage in the fading light of the setting sun. More than 7,000 people are waiting, many without knowing who he is. The tension is palpable. The unknown guitarist must justify following in the footsteps of the Who. The opening chords of Killing Floor, a cover of the Howlin' Wolf Blues. But it doesn't sound like traditional blues. It sounds like blues from the future, played by aliens who absorbed tradition and distilled it into its purest essence. The volume is massive. The sound fills the venue like a physical presence. Hendrix doesn't just play. He performs with his entire body. The guitar behind his head. With his teeth. Sensual movements, impossible positions, all while the musical precision remains perfect. The Californian audience, accustomed to sweet folk rock and peaceful psychedelia, watches with mouths agape. This isn't just music. It's possession. It's trance. It's something rock and roll has been searching for without knowing what it was. Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone, transformed from a folk ballad into an apocalyptic electric anthem. Then, Rock Me Baby, a classic blues reinvented. Hendrix is sweating, completely immersed. The connection with the audience is almost telepathic. Every riff, every guitar scream, every facial expression communicates something deeper than mere entertainment. And then comes Wild Thing. The Trog's simple song, 3 basic chords that any beginner can play. But in Hendrix's hands, it transforms into a 10-minute sonic odyssey. The opening groove is dirty, sexual, menacing. Hendrix sings softly, almost whispering, "Wild thing, you make my heart sing." But gradually, the intensity increases. The Marshall amplifiers begin to roar. The distortion thickens. Hendrix draws in controlled feedback, creating squeals that blend melodically. It is music and non-music simultaneously. It is rock and it is experimental sound art. The climax is approaching. Hendrix kneels before his amplifiers. The guitar is pressed against the speaker grill, generating dense, rippling feedback. It's a moment of absolute tension. The audience doesn't know what to expect. Hendrix places the Stratocaster on the stage floor. He takes out a small can of lighter fluid. He sprays it onto the guitar's body. The clear liquid soaks into the painted wood. Tense silence. What is he doing? A match. The flame is small and yellow. Hendrix drops it onto the guitar. The fire explodes. Flames engulf the Stratocaster. Bright orange against the Californian sunset. The smell of burning wood and melting paint fills the air. Some in the audience scream. Others are frozen. But Hendrix doesn't run away. He kneels closer to the fire as if worshipping it. His hands touch the air above the flames, as if drawing out the last invisible notes. It's a ritual ceremony. It's electric voodoo. It's the death and rebirth of rock and roll in a single image. Finally, he picks up the burning remains of the guitar and raises them above his head. The charred pieces fall. Some people at the front of the stage collect fragments like sacred relics. Hendrix leaves the stage. The silence lasts a full 3 seconds. Then chaos erupts. Applause, shouts, confusion, ecstasy. No one has ever seen anything remotely like it. Backstage, mixed reactions. Some musicians are horrified. Pete Townsend, whose guitar destruction was raw punk, feels that Hendrix turned destruction into high art. He is impressed and slightly annoyed. Others are ecstatic. Mama Cass Elliot of the Mamas and the Papas is crying. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she says. The documentary's cameraman captured everything. The film, Monterey Pop, directed by D.A. Pennebaker, will preserve this moment for history. Millions who weren't there will eventually see it. The image of Hendrix kneeling before his burning guitar will become one of the most powerful visual icons of the rock era. But beyond the symbolism, beyond the spectacle, something fundamental changed that night. Hendrix proved that rock could be more than simple rebellion. It could be ritual. It could be performance art. It could be spiritual transformation through amplified sound. American newspapers are abuzz with the story. Guitarist burns instrument in savage act. New British sound hits America with fire. The headlines are sensational, but serious music reviews recognize something deeper. The San Francisco Chronicle critic writes, "Jimi Hendrix doesn't just play guitar. He reinvents the instrument every time he plays it." What we witnessed in Monterey wasn't empty pyrotechnics, but the most honest declaration that rock and roll has evolved beyond its simple origins into something vast and unknown. Within days, Hendrix was the dominant topic of conversation in American music circles. FM radio stations, still experimental and free from rigid formats, began playing his songs. Purple Haze climbed the charts. The album, Are You Experienced?, finally received a U.S. release in August 1967. America, his own country that ignored him, finally adopts him. But not as a humble prodigal son. As a prophet of the future returning to preach an electric gospel. But for Hendrix, American success is complicated. He's a black man playing music that white people call rock, not rhythm and blues. His audiences are predominantly white. The Chitlin circuit clubs where he got his start don't recognize him as one of their own. The Black American community in 1967 is in the midst of a cultural revolution. Black power, African American pride, rejection of white cultural standards. And here's Hendrix, with his psychedelic clothes, his racially integrated band, playing for white hippies. Some black critics accuse him of selling out, of abandoning black music to make money in white markets. The accusations sting. Hendrix doesn't deny his blues and rhythm and blues roots, but his musical vision is genuinely broader. He listens to Bob Dylan and Muddy Waters with equal reverence. He sees music as a territory beyond racial lines. This tension would remain throughout his career. The black guitarist who expanded the boundaries of rock but was never fully accepted by black soul and funk audiences. The American musician who needed European validation to be recognized at home. New York. Summer of 1967. Between grueling shows, Hendrix is in the studio working on new material. Success brought resources, better equipment, more studio time, a budget for experimentation. But it also brought pressure. Each single had to top the last. Each live performance had to justify their growing reputation. Journalists constantly asked, "What will you do that's wilder than burn your guitar?" Hendrix feels the weight of it all. In interviews, he sometimes seems distant, lost in thought. "I don't want to be just the guy who burned a guitar," he tells a journalist. "I want the music to be remembered, not just the show." It's an important distinction. Hendrix understands that the Monterey show was perfectly executed but dangerous. If it devolves into empty circus tricks, his art becomes trivialized. He must continue pushing the music itself into new territories. Autumn of 1967. Axis, Bold as Love, the second album by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, is being recorded at Olympic Studios in London. Eddie Kramer is back at the mixing console. Roger Mayer provides new experimental pedals. This album will be different. Less straightforward blues than Are You Experienced, more exploratory. Spanish Castle Magic blends funk rhythms with psychedelia. Little Wing is an ethereal ballad of less than 3 minutes that contains more melodic beauty than entire albums by other artists. The guitar solo in Little Wing is particularly revealing of Hendrix's genius. It's only about 40 seconds long, but every note is perfectly placed. There's no excess, no empty display of speed. It's pure, singing melody, where the guitar speaks with an almost human voice. Technically, Hendrix uses double stops, 2 notes played simultaneously, and subtle bends that add vocal expressiveness. But the technique is invisible. You only hear pure emotion. The album's title track, Bold as Love, is a personal statement disguised as psychedelia. The lyrics speak of the colors of emotions. Anger is red, jealousy is green, love is gold. But there is one line that resonates prophetically. My red is so confident that he flashes trophies of war, but my yellow in this case is not so mellow. In fact, I'm trying to say it's frightened like me. Hendrix is confessing vulnerability. Beneath the confident guitarist, the self-assured showman, lies fear. Fear of failure. Fear of not living up to expectations. Fear that the fire he ignited will consume him. Winter of 1967 to 1968. The Jimi Hendrix Experience embarks on an extensive U.S. tour. Increasingly larger venues. Increasingly wild audiences. But Hendrix notices something disturbing. People come for the spectacle more than the music. They shout, "Burn your guitar," when he tries to play softer songs. They expect tricks, not art. In Detroit, a group of white teenagers clumsily burned an amplifier in imitation. In Chicago, organizers asked him to burn another guitar for publicity. Hendrix refused. The Monterey moment was unique, spontaneous, significant. To repeat it would be a farce. But the damage is done. His image is frozen in that fiery moment. Now he must work twice as hard to get people to hear the musical substance beyond the spectacle. There's another tension growing. Hendrix is so virtuosic that he makes his complexity look easy. Aspiring guitarists buy his albums, try to learn his solos, and are frustrated to discover that what sounds fluid on recordings is technically brutal. His use of thumb chords, a technique where he wraps his thumb around the fretboard to press down on the low E string while the other fingers form chords, is nearly impossible for small hands. His simultaneous multi-string bends require finger strength that only comes from years of practice. His rhythmic coordination between his right and left hands is so precise that imitating even his simple parts reveals hidden complexity. So guitarists take shortcuts. They imitate his poses without his technique. They copy his clothing without his musicality. They buy the same effects hoping that technology will replace talent. A generation of mediocre imitators begins to emerge. They all play loud, they all use distortion, they all attempt long, drawn-out solos. But few understand that Hendrix's volume served expressive dynamics, his distortion was precisely sculpted, and his solos told coherent emotional stories. Hendrix's influence is expanding. But with that expansion comes inevitable dilution. Spring of 1968. Hendrix is exhausted. 18 months of non-stop success. 3 albums in 2 years. Relentless touring. Constant media pressure. And a growing recognition. The power trio format, guitar, bass, drums, is limiting. They can do more. They need more colors in their sonic palette. Keyboards, perhaps. Additional musicians who can keep up with their increasingly experimental jam sessions. The Jimi Hendrix Experience, the band that propelled him to stardom, is showing cracks. Noel Redding feels increasingly marginalized. Egos clash. Personal chemistry deteriorates under the stress of success. Hendrix begins to envision something new. An expanded band. A funkier sound. Less bound to traditional song structures. More freedom to explore Afrocentric rhythms that connect with his roots and with the Black cultural currents that are transforming the United States. But before that transformation, there is one final masterpiece to complete with the original lineup. An ambitious double album. The most expensive project in rock history up to that point. A definitive statement that Jimi Hendrix was not just a technical innovator, but a visual artist working in pure sound. Electric Lady Studios, New York. Although it doesn't yet physically exist, it already exists in Hendrix's mind. He's tired of working in other people's studios, under time constraints, with engineers who don't fully understand his vision. But first, he must create something that justifies building his own sonic temple. Spring of 1968. The third album by the Jimi Hendrix Experience is planned. It won't be another record of short, punchy songs. It will be a full-blown artistic statement. Electric Ladyland. A double album. Over 70 minutes of music. In an era where typical albums last 35 minutes, it's a bold statement. The record company is nervous. Will the public buy an expensive double album? Is there enough quality material to justify the length? Hendrix has no doubts. He has accumulated enough ideas for 3 albums. The problem will be deciding what to leave out. Record Plant Studios, New York. Summer of 1968. The sessions for Electric Ladyland extend for months. Eddie Kramer is again in control, but Hendrix is more involved than ever in every production decision. He records multiple takes of each song. Dozens sometimes. Not because the first ones are bad, but because he's looking for something specific that he can't articulate verbally. He'll recognize it when he listens to it. Overdubs pile up. On Bob Dylan's cover of All Along the Watchtower, Hendrix recorded at least 5 different guitar tracks that intertwine in a complex sonic tapestry. Each guitar has its own tone, its own voice in the conversation. Mitch Mitchell recalls sessions that lasted until dawn. Hendrix in a trance, playing the same passage repeatedly, subtly altering the pitch or timing until it perfectly matched the vision in his head. 15 minutes. Voodoo Chili, without the slight return in the title, is an extended blues jam that takes up an entire side of the vinyl. It's indulgent, excessive, glorious. The session that produced this recording is legendary. Hendrix invited additional musicians, Steve Winwood of Traffic on Hammond organ, and Jack Cassidy of Jefferson Airplane on bass, complementing Noel Redding. The expanded setup allowed for richer textures. The jam starts slow, almost languid. Traditional 12-bar blues. But gradually, the intensity builds. Winwood's organ adds a gospel dimension. Hendrix's guitars begin spitting notes like liquid fire. Mitchell executes drum patterns that are jazz rock before the term even existed. There is no conventional song structure. It is pure instrumental conversation. Call and response between guitar and organ. Moments of tension followed by cathartic release. It is music being created in real time, captured in its imperfect but vital birth. Bob Dylan wrote All Along the Watchtower as a stark acoustic folk song. 3 cryptic verses, an apocalyptic atmosphere, but minimalist execution. It appears on his album, John Wesley Harding, from December 1967. Hendrix listens to the song and sees something Dylan didn't: massive electrical potential. He sees the apocalypse not as a whisper but as a storm. Hendrix's version completely transforms the song. The intro features that distinctive guitar riff that would become one of the most recognizable in rock history. Dave Mason of Traffic contributes 12-string acoustic guitar, adding a folky texture beneath the roaring electric guitars. But it's the guitar solo that defines the song. 40 seconds of perfect economy. Every note counts. There's not a single wasted note. Hendrix uses his chromatic bending technique, bending strings in half-step increments, to create a melody that sounds simultaneously like a guitar and a human voice screaming prophecy. The harmonic structure is simple, just 3 chords. But Hendrix creates so much melodic movement, so much tension and release within that simplicity, that the song sounds epic without pretension. Bob Dylan will hear Hendrix's version and publicly declare, "He gave me back my own song. He made it his own in such a way that I could never get it back." Since then, Dylan has performed All Along the Watchtower live in Hendrix's style, not his own original version. It's the ultimate tribute. Almost 14 minutes. The most ambitious song on the album. A science fiction narrative about escaping a war-torn world, transforming into a sea creature to survive in the oceans. The production is cinematic. Hendrix uses the studio as a compositional tool. Multiple guitars create textures that sound like synthesizers, even though they are purely analog. Flanger effects, processing that creates a cosmic sweep sound, give a sense of underwater movement. The middle section dissolves into an ambient soundscape. Only textures, atmosphere, a hint of melody floating in the distance. It's musique concrete in a rock context. It's what progressive rock bands would attempt years later, but Hendrix got there first. Commercially, it's suicide. No radio station will play a 14-minute song. There's no obvious hook. It's pure art, with no compromise on accessibility. But Hendrix isn't concerned with commercial success right now. He's pushing boundaries, exploring territories where rock has never gone before. He's proving that the electric guitar can be a tool for sonic painting, not just for verse-chorus-verse songs. The album needed a cover. In England, Track Records, the label that distributed Hendrix, decided, without consulting Hendrix, to use a photograph of 19 naked women in provocative poses. The image was explicitly sexual, almost pornographic by the standards of 1968. Hendrix was furious when he saw the final artwork. He wasn't a prude, his lyrics often contained sexual innuendo, but this cover reduced his music to cheap sex bait. It didn't reflect the artistic complexity of the content. There's a protest, but it's too late. Thousands of copies have already been printed for the British market. The predictable controversy erupts. Shops refuse to display the album. Parents complain. The tabloids have a field day. For the American release, a different image was used: Hendrix sitting with children, photographed by Linda Eastman, who would later become Linda McCartney. It was a gentle, almost innocent image. Hendrix preferred it, but the damage to his reputation in England had already been done. October 1968. Electric Ladyland is released. Sales are strong. It will reach #1 in the United States, the only Hendrix album to achieve this during his lifetime. But critics are divided. Some journalists declare it a masterpiece. Rolling Stone, the newly founded rock magazine, praises it as the definitive statement of rock as an art form. Other critics complain of indulgence. Too long, they write. Hendrix needs an editor to rein in his excesses. The extended pieces are criticized as musical masturbation, technically impressive but lacking emotional substance. It's a tension that will haunt ambitious artists for decades, bold experimentation or pretentious self-indulgence. The line is subjective. What some see as necessary exploration, others see as a lack of discipline. Hendrix reads the mixed reviews and feels frustrated. He created exactly what he wanted to create. He pushed his art in new directions. Isn't that what artists are supposed to do? Why do audiences and critics expect him to repeat tried and tested formulas instead of taking risks? But other musicians understand immediately. The album is listened to obsessively by guitarists trying to decipher Hendrix's techniques, by producers studying the studio textures, and by composers recognizing its structural audacity. Miles Davis, the jazz trumpeter in the midst of his own revolution toward electric fusion, listened to Electric Ladyland repeatedly. He recognized in Hendrix a kindred spirit, someone who respected no genre boundaries, who treated music as a constant experimental quest. Davis began incorporating electric guitars into his music. His 1969 album, Bitches Brew, which transformed jazz, was directly influenced by Hendrix's sonic freedom. Frank Zappa, a prolific experimentalist, recognized Hendrix as the only rock guitarist doing anything genuinely innovative. Zappa was a fierce critic of musical mediocrity. His respect for Hendrix was a significant mark of validation. But the obsessive perfectionism of Electric Ladyland took its toll. The sessions lasted for months. The budget ballooned. The album cost over $60,000, an astronomical sum in 1968. Relations within the Jimi Hendrix experience are severely strained. Noel Redding feels marginalized. Hendrix brought in additional musicians to the sessions, Jack Cassidy on bass, Al Kooper on keyboards, implying that Redding isn't enough. Mitch Mitchell remains loyal, but even he is exhausted. The endless late-night sessions, the obsessive repetition, the pursuit of unattainable perfection. And Hendrix himself is physically and mentally exhausted. Drugs, primarily LSD and marijuana, but occasionally cocaine, are part of the creative process. They help open perceptual doors, but they also take a toll on psychological stability. There are moments in the studio where Hendrix seems lost, disconnected, struggling to articulate what he hears in his head. Kramer learns to interpret his vague cues. Needs more blue means adding reverb. Too much purple means reducing the distortion at a certain frequency. The album's final track. 3 minutes of era-defining guitar. Voodoo Child, Slight Return, is a condensed, more aggressive version of the extended jam Voodoo Chili. The opening riff is instantly iconic. Wah-wah pedal pumping funky rhythm, thick distortion, absolute confidence. When Hendrix sings, well, I'm a voodoo child, Lord knows I'm a voodoo child, it's not empty boasting. It's a declaration of identity. The guitar solo that begins around the 2-minute mark is a Hendrix masterclass. Wide, expressive bends. Use of space, leaving strategic pauses that build tension. Rapid climbs up the fretboard followed by melodic statements in the mid-register. It's aggressive yet musical, technical yet emotional. The production perfectly captures his live sound. The amplifiers are pushed to the brink of collapse, creating that rich, harmonically complex distortion that defines the Hendrix tone. This song will become his calling card. He'll open shows with it. He'll close shows with it. Other artists will cover it for decades. It will appear in movies, commercials, video games. It's the quintessential rock guitar song. With Electric Ladyland complete, Hendrix faces a crucial question: where to next? He has perfected the power trio format. He has demonstrated his ability to create elaborate studio music using readily available technology. He has explored blues, rock, psychedelia, proto-funk, and avant-garde experimentation. But he feels limited. He wants more musicians. He wants to explore Afrocentric rhythms more deeply. He wants to connect with Black audiences who see him as a curiosity, not as a brother. The American cultural climate is changing. 1968 is a year of extreme turbulence. The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, riots at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, and protests against the Vietnam War intensifying. The peaceful psychedelia of 1967 now seems naive. Music must respond to a harsher reality. Hendrix feels pressure to be more explicitly political, more aligned with the Black Power movement. But his art was never propaganda. It was always personal, inward, exploratory. Can one maintain artistic integrity while responding to demands for political relevance? The Jimi Hendrix Experience plays its final shows in June of 1969. The internal tension is unbearable. Redding is resentful. Hendrix is distant. Only Mitchell maintains professionalism. The final show at the Denver Coliseum was tense. They performed the songs competently, but without the magical chemistry that once defined the band. After the concert, there was no official announcement. They simply never played together again. Hendrix needs change. He needs freedom from expectations. He needs to explore musical directions that the trio format cannot accommodate. But it also needs something more fundamental. It needs to discover who Jimi Hendrix is beyond the icon that Monterey created, beyond the virtuoso that Electric Ladyland documented. He needs to find his voice not just as a technical guitarist or theatrical showman, but as a Black American man at a time of radical cultural transformation. And that quest will lead him to a muddy stage on a New York farm, in front of the biggest audience of his life, to play the most powerful political statement he will ever make. Without uttering a single word. Bethel, New York. A dairy farm 150 kilometers north of New York City. August 1969. What was planned as a music festival for 50,000 people has become a temporary city of more than 400,000. Mud is everywhere. 3 days of intermittent rain have turned the fields into a quagmire. There isn't enough food. There aren't enough toilets. The sound system is inadequate. Medically, it's a disaster. Cases of bad LSD trips, dehydration, minor injuries. But something extraordinary is happening. An entire generation has come together. Woodstock. Though technically in Bethel, the name comes from the nearby town where it was originally planned, is becoming a defining moment of counterculture. And Jimi Hendrix will close the festival. Last performance. The end. Hendrix no longer plays with the Experience. He has formed Gypsy Sun and Rainbows, a terrible name that thankfully won't last. The lineup is radically different. 2 drummers, Mitch Mitchell and Juma Sultan. 2 additional percussionists, Juma also plays congas, Jerry Velez timbals, bassist Billy Cox, a friend of Hendrix's since his military days, and rhythm guitarist Larry Lee. It's a bigger, funkier group, more aligned with an Afrocentric sensibility. But it's also a band with no experience to speak. They've only rehearsed for a few weeks. They never played together live before Woodstock. Hendrix is nervous. This is the most important show of his career. 500,000 people. Massive media coverage. A pivotal cultural moment. The festival is catastrophically delayed. Hendrix was scheduled to play at midnight on Sunday. But the opening acts are running late. Technical problems are piling up delays. Rain is interrupting sets. Finally, Hendrix takes the stage at 8:30 a.m. on Monday, August 18th. The sun is already high. Most of the massive audience has left. Of 400,000, perhaps 40,000 remain. Exhausted, muddy, hungry. This isn't the epic closing night Hendrix envisioned. It's a raw morning after a 3-day party. The energy is depleted, not electric. But Hendrix has something to say. And he'll say it in the most powerful way possible. The first 90 minutes of the set are uneven. The new band struggles with cohesion. Some jams drag on without clear direction. The coordination between the 2 drummers is imperfect. Hendrix plays favorites, Fire, Spanish Castle Magic, Red House. But without the chemistry of the experience, the songs sound looser, less focused. Some moments are brilliant, others are sloppy. The remaining audience responds with subdued enthusiasm. They are tired. They want to go home. Many are literally packing their things while Hendrix plays. And then, near the end of the set, Hendrix announces, "We're going to play something different. An experimental American anthem." He adjusts his guitar strap. His fingers find the strings. And he begins to play the Star-Spangled Banner. The national anthem of the United States, the Star-Spangled Banner, was written in 1814 by Francis Scott Key during the War of 1812 against England. A symbol of American patriotism, it is sung at baseball games, civic ceremonies, and military events. Hendrix plays it on electric guitar. Solo. Without accompaniment. The opening notes are relatively straightforward. The melody is recognizable. "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light?" But even from the start, there's something different. The tone of his guitar is dense, distorted. It's not reverence. It's something more complex. And then Hendrix begins to dismantle the anthem. Between the traditional melodic phrases, he injects sounds that don't belong, sharp feedback like falling bombs. Dive bombs with the tremolo bar that sound like planes in a dive. Dissonant clusters that evoke explosions. He's not playing the nationalist anthem directly. He's filtering it through Vietnam. Through prose. Through tear gas in American streets. Through the experience of being a black soldier in a controversial war. The rest of the audience freezes. Some immediately understand what's happening. Others are confused. Is this respect or sacrilege? The performance lasts approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds. In that time, Hendrix delivers one of the most powerful political statements ever made without words. It alternates between playing the anthem's melody recognizably and destroying it in sonic chaos. It's a musical dialogue, the promise of America versus the reality of America. Patriotic rhetoric versus the lived experience of war, racism, and domestic violence. He uses all his accumulated techniques, wah to create wailing voices, a tremolo bar for dive bombs and sirens, controlled feedback for explosions. But these aren't circus tricks. Every sound effect has narrative significance. When the song plays, the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, the bombs are real in their interpretation. Not metaphorical. They are napalm over Vietnam. They are tear gas at demonstrations. They are the violence that America exports and imports. The brilliance of Hendrix's interpretation lies in its ambiguity. It's not simply anti-American protest. It's not a cynical parody of the anthem. There are moments when he plays the melody with something close to tenderness, as if he were lamenting the gap between American ideals and American reality. As if he were asking, can America be what it promises to be? This ambiguity infuriates both ends of the political spectrum. Conservatives accuse him of treason, of mocking a sacred symbol. Left-wing radicals accuse him of lukewarmness, of not completely rejecting patriotism. But Hendrix is not a simple polemicist. He is an artist with a nuanced perspective. He is a U.S. military veteran. He served briefly as a paratrooper in 1961 before being discharged. He is a black man who experienced American racism firsthand. He is a musician who found fame in Europe first because America ignored him. His relationship with America is complicated, and his interpretation of the anthem reflects that complexity. When it ends, there is a brief silence, then applause. But it is not a unanimous ovation. Some applaud vigorously. Others remain still, processing what they heard. Backstage afterward, musicians are divided. Some think it was brilliant. Others think it was a political mistake, too controversial, too risky. The footage of the performance was included in the documentary Woodstock, released in 1970. Images of Hendrix with his headband, fringed jacket, and white Stratocaster guitar, playing the distorted anthem, became a visual icon of the era. Within days, the controversy exploded. Conservative columnists denounced Hendrix. "A disgrace to our national anthem," wrote one columnist. "A mockery of everything America stands for." War veterans are particularly offended. Organizations such as the American Legion, a veterans group, issue condemnatory statements. But others defend the interpretation. Music critics argue that Hendrix created genuinely important art, capturing the cultural moment with brutal honesty. Anti-war activists celebrate it as a perfect statement of their feelings. Hendrix himself was asked by reporters what he was trying to say. His answer was characteristic: "I don't know, man. It's just music. All I did was play. All I did was play what I felt." He refuses to be reduced to a political slogan. He refuses to explain his art in simple, didactic terms. Interpretation exists. People can take from it what they need. But there is historical context that adds further depth. In 1969, the national anthem was being used as a cultural weapon. At sporting events, when anti-war protesters refuse to stand during the national anthem, they are physically attacked. In schools, students are expelled for not reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Patriotism has become a mandatory test of loyalty. Hendrix reclaiming the anthem, playing it in a way that honors the melody while questioning reality, is an act of cultural repatriation. He is saying, this symbol does not belong only to militarists and conservatives. It belongs to all Americans, including those who criticize their country's policies. It's dissenting patriotism. Love for one's country expressed through honest criticism, not blind adoration. Decades later, Hendrix's performance of the anthem at Woodstock would be recognized as one of the most important artistic statements of the Vietnam era. Other artists would attempt provocative interpretations of the anthem. Marvin Gaye would sing a smooth soul version at the NBA All-Star Game in 1983. Whitney Houston would sing a powerful version during the Gulf War in 1991. But none would capture the emotional complexity of Hendrix's version. What Hendrix demonstrated is that instrumental music can be just as political as explicit lyrics. That tone, texture, and distortion can communicate complex ideas. That you don't need words to make a statement about war, justice, or national identity. But for Hendrix personally, Woodstock was bittersweet. It created an iconic moment, yes. But the overall set was disorganized. The new band didn't work as he had hoped. Weeks later, he disbanded Gypsy Sun and Rainbows. He kept Billy Cox on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums, forming a power trio once again. This trio would be called Band of Gypsies, although that lineup would also be temporary. Hendrix feels intensified pressure. Every performance now has to be a political statement. Every song has to have a message. The artistic freedom he always valued is being constrained by expectations that he be a spokesperson for his generation. In interviews, he seems increasingly tired. "I just want to play music," he says repeatedly. "I'm not a political leader. I'm not a prophet. I'm just a musician." But the music itself continues to evolve. Post-Woodstock, Hendrix moves toward a more funk-oriented, groove-driven sound. Fewer extended guitar solos, more emphasis on collective rhythm. The new songs he's writing, Earth Blues, Easy Rider, Freedom, reflect a more explicit political awareness. But they're never simple propaganda. There's always ambiguity, complexity, questioning. Freedom repeats the refrain, "Freedom, that's what I want." But the music is tense, almost claustrophobic. It's not a celebration of freedom achieved, but a yearning for freedom still unattainable. Meanwhile, a personal project is coming to fruition, Electric Lady Studios in Greenwich Village, New York. Hendrix is building his own recording studio. He's invested massively, over $1 million eventually. The design is elaborate, organic, curved shapes on the walls for optimal acoustics, custom lighting, and state-of-the-art equipment. It will be his sanctuary, the place where he can experiment without the time constraints of a rented studio. where he can work until dawn without worrying about hourly costs, where he can finally fully realize the sonic ideas in his head. The studio opens in August of 1970. Hendrix is excited, energized. He has a new double album planned. New material that represents his artistic evolution. Music that integrates rock, funk, blues, jazz, and experimentation into a unique synthesis. But time is running out. Although he doesn't know it, Woodstock cemented Hendrix's status as a cultural icon. The guitarist who played the anthem in the storm. The artist who captured the moral turmoil of wartime America. But that iconic status comes at a price. Hendrix is caught between multiple and incompatible expectations. To be a technical virtuoso, a theatrical showman, a political voice, a musical innovator, a commercial star. Can an artist fulfill all those roles simultaneously? Or will the conflicting demands eventually tear them apart? That question will remain. Until one night in London, barely a year after Woodstock, it all came to an abrupt end. Greenwich Village, New York. August 1970. Electric Lady Studios is finally complete. Hendrix walks through his own studio with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. The walls are curved, organic, and painted in psychedelic colors. The control room has a state-of-the-art console. There's space for multiple musicians, for expanded jams, for limitless experimentation. It cost over $1 million, an astronomical investment that has left him heavily in debt. But it is his temple, his laboratory, the place where he can finally work without external pressures of time or budget. He immediately began recording. Late-night sessions with rotating musicians. Billy Cox on bass. Mitch Mitchell on drums. Buddy Miles occasionally. Session musicians for additional textures. The new material is different. More mature. Less guitar fireworks, more atmosphere building. Dolly Dagger has an infectious funky groove. Drifting is an ethereal ballad. Belly Button Window is almost jazz in its harmonic sensibility. But Hendrix is exhausted. 4 years of constant success without a real break. Relentless touring. Financial pressures. Lawsuits, former managers are suing him, contract disputes are piling up. And drugs. He's not addicted to heroin like some of his contemporaries. But LSD, marijuana, occasional cocaine, sleeping pills, all are part of his daily life. He self-medicates for stress, insomnia, and high blood pressure. In interviews from this period, he seems distant. His answers are vague, sometimes incoherent. Journalists note that he seems lost, as if part of him were somewhere else. Close friends are worried. Noel Redding, with whom Hendrix no longer plays, watches from a distance and sees someone on the verge of collapse. But no one effectively intervenes. In 1970, there was no mental health infrastructure for rock stars. The show simply goes on. September 1970. Hendrix embarks on a European tour. Germany, Sweden, Denmark, England. The shows are inconsistent. Some nights he's brilliant. Other nights he's clearly disconnected, playing out of contractual obligation rather than inspiration. At the Isle of Wight Festival in England, the last major festival of the summer, Hendrix plays before 600,000 people. But the performance is loose, erratic. His guitar is constantly going out of tune. He seems frustrated, unable to reach the impossible standards he himself set. The reviews are harsh. Hendrix seems to have lost his magic, writes one journalist. The performance was disappointing compared to his legendary form. Hendrix reads these reviews. They hurt him. He knows he's not at his best. But he doesn't know how to stop the machine that's consuming him. London. September 1970. Between commitments, Hendrix meets with friends, musicians, and acquaintances. The conversations reveal a man at an existential crossroads. With producer Alan Douglas, he discusses future plans. He wants to record with a full orchestra. He wants to explore composition beyond the rock band format. He talks about formally studying music theory, about filling the gaps in his education. With Mitch Mitchell, he discusses reforming the Jimi Hendrix experience. Billy Cox has returned to the United States after suffering a drug-induced nervous breakdown. Mitchell and Hendrix discuss returning to the lineup that made them famous. In an interview with journalist Keith Altham, Hendrix said something revealing. "I'm tired of being a guitar hero. I want the music to speak, not my tricks. I want people to hear what I'm trying to say, not just how I play it." It's a declaration from a mature artist tired of his own legend. But the world isn't ready to let go of the Hendrix of Monterey, the Hendrix of Woodstock, the guitar god. September 6, 1970. Fehmarn Island, Germany. Love and Peace Festival. It will be Jimi Hendrix's last concert. The festival is an organizational disaster. Torrential rain has turned the site into a mud pit. German Hells Angels, hired as security, are beating attendees. The atmosphere is hostile and dangerous. Hendrix takes the stage exhausted. The performance is uneven. He plays favorites, All Along the Watchtower, Voodoo Child, Slight Return, Red House. But he lacks energy. His solos are competent but uninspired. During Hey Joe, his voice cracks. He seems to be struggling to stay focused. The weather is brutal, strong wind, rain, biting cold. The set ends abruptly. There's no encore. He simply leaves the stage. The organizers are upset. The audience is confused. Nobody knows what his farewell was about. He returns to London after the German festival. He stays at the Samarkand Hotel in Notting Hill with his then-girlfriend, Monika Danman, a German painter he had recently met. The following days are fragmented and disorganized. He attends jam sessions in small clubs. He visits friends. He makes phone calls to the United States discussing future plans. To Chas Chandler, who had discovered him 4 years earlier, he says, "I need help, man. I need to get back to basics." Chandler promises to work with him again, to help him simplify his life, to focus on music. To his father Al Hendrix in Seattle, he says in a phone call, "I'll be home soon, Dad. I need to rest." But first, one more night in London. Thursday, September 17, 1970. Hendrix spends a relatively quiet day. He has lunch with friends. He visits music stores. In the evening, he goes to a party at an acquaintance's apartment. Around 1:40 a.m., he returns to the Samarkand Hotel with Danman. They are tired. Hendrix mentions that he is having trouble sleeping. He has been struggling with insomnia for weeks. Danman offers sleeping pills. Vesperax, a powerful German sedative. The recommended dose is half a tablet or 1 tablet maximum. Exactly what happens next will be debated for decades. Friday, September 18, 1970. Monika Danman wakes up around 10 a.m. Hendrix is asleep. She goes to buy cigarettes and returns around 11 a.m. Hendrix is still asleep. She tries to wake him up. He doesn't respond. He panics. He calls an ambulance. The paramedics arrive at 11:45 a.m. They find Hendrix unconscious, vomit in his mouth and nose, not breathing. He is rushed to St. Mary Abbot Hospital. Doctors work frantically to revive him. But it's too late. Much too late. James Marshall Hendrix was pronounced dead at 12:45 p.m. He was 27 years old. The autopsy determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation from aspiration of vomit while intoxicated with barbiturates. Simply put, he took too many sleeping pills, vomited while unconscious, and choked on his own vomit. Was it an accident or suicide? This question will haunt researchers and fans for decades. The evidence suggests an accident. Hendrix left no note. He did not express suicidal intentions to close friends. He had future plans, scheduled recording sessions, discussions about new projects. But he took a massive amount of sleeping pills. Danman will claim he took 9 Vesperax tablets, a potentially lethal dose. Why would he take so many? Was he unaware of the danger? Was it a mistake in a confused state? Or was it a conscious decision by someone exhausted beyond the capacity to continue? The truth is probably somewhere in gray. It wasn't planned suicide, but it was reckless negligence on the part of someone too tired to take proper care of themselves. The news explodes globally. Headlines in all major newspapers. Television interrupts regular programming. Radio stations play his songs on commemorative loops. Eric Clapton, who 4 years earlier felt that Hendrix had eclipsed him, is devastated. "The world has just lost the greatest guitarist that ever lived," he declares publicly. Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones, "It's an incalculable loss for music." Pete Townsend, "Hendrix was the only one who truly understood that the electric guitar was a new instrument, not just an amplified guitar." Miles Davis, the jazz trumpeter who admired Hendrix, "We lost someone who was just beginning to discover everything he could do." Fans and musicians immediately began speculating about what Hendrix would have created had he lived. He was only 27 years old. 4 years of recorded career. Most musicians are just starting out at that age. Would he have continued to evolve musically? Would he have explored jazz fusion like Miles Davis? Would he have embraced funk more fully? Would he have collaborated with classical orchestras? The tapes from his last sessions at Electric Lady Studios reveal new directions. More sophisticated composition. Less reliance on guitar virtuosity. An interest in textures, atmospheres, and spaces. But it's all speculation. Wishful thinking. The reality is that its evolution came to an abrupt halt. Seattle, Washington. October 1, 1970. Jimi Hendrix's funeral at Dunlap Baptist Church. Thousands of fans fill the streets outside. Inside, only close family and friends. His father, Al Hendrix, is devastated. Mitch Mitchell attends. Noel Redding does not. He is too traumatized. The service is traditional, conservative. Gospel singing. Words about finding eternal peace. No electric guitars. No distortion. No feedback. There's something ironic and sad about this. The man who revolutionized electric music is being given a conventional acoustic send-off. Hendrix is buried in Greenwood Memorial Park in Renton, Washington, near Seattle. The simple headstone will eventually bear the inscription, "Forever in our hearts." In the weeks following his death, his albums sold millions. Electric Ladyland returned to the charts. Radio stations organized Hendrix marathons. But this also marks the beginning of a problem that will haunt his legacy: posthumous exploitation. Hendrix left behind countless hours of unfinished studio tapes. Jams, experiments, partial ideas. His family and former managers begin releasing posthumous albums. Some are carefully curated. Others are compilations of inferior material, released solely to capitalize on his name. For decades, Hendrix's catalog would be a battleground of legal disputes. Who controls his music? What should be released? How should it be presented? It wasn't until 1995 that his family regained full control of his musical legacy. Jimi Hendrix is the third. Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones died a year earlier, also at 27. Janis Joplin would die 3 weeks after Hendrix, also at 27, also from an overdose. Jim Morrison of The Doors will die in July 1971 in Paris. He was also 27 years old. This macabre coincidence will eventually be called the 27 Club. Kurt Cobain will join in 1994. Amy Winehouse in 2011. There's something about that age, late youth, too much success too fast, too much pressure, too many substances, not enough support structure. Hendrix became a legend. But the cost of that legend was his life. Was it worth it? An impossible and inappropriate question. But unavoidable. Hendrix fundamentally changed music. He expanded the possibilities of the electric guitar more than any other single musician. He influenced generations of guitarists who came after him. He created music that remains vital more than 50 years later. But he lived only 27 years. He experienced massive success for less than 4. He spent his last months exhausted, pressured, lost. The system that propelled him to stardom didn't know how to sustain him. The music industry in 1970 had no protocols for the mental health of artists. Massive success came without an instruction manual on how to handle it. Hendrix paid the price. Like so many others. There is a recording of Hendrix from one of his last days at Electric Lady Studios before leaving for Europe. Just him, an acoustic guitar, exploring gentle melodic ideas. There is no distortion. There are no amplifiers. Just nylon strings and a human voice humming melodies. It's a reminder that beneath the showman, beneath the technical virtuoso, beneath the icon, there was simply a musician. Someone who loved sound, who heard music in everything, in conversations, in traffic noise, in silence. That simple recording is perhaps the most honest testament. Not the guitar on fire, not the impossible solos. Just a man and his instrument exploring possibilities. And then silence. September 19, 1970. The world wakes to the news. Jimi Hendrix is dead. Guitarists around the globe feel the impact viscerally. In London, a young guitarist named Eddie Van Halen, who would later emigrate to California and revolutionize rock again in the 70s, hears the news and cries. His hero, his role model, the reason he plays guitar, is gone. In Texas, a teenager named Stevie Ray Vaughan, who would eventually become the most direct heir to Hendrix's blues rock legacy, locks himself in his room playing Hendrix songs repeatedly as a morning ritual. In England, a 12-year-old boy named Slash, future guitarist for Guns N' Roses, doesn't fully understand who Hendrix was yet, but his older brothers are devastated, and he feels that something seismic has changed. Hendrix's death creates a void that no one can fill. Because it wasn't just about technique. It was about a complete vision that combined technical innovation, artistic risk, cultural sensitivity, and perfect historical timing. To understand Hendrix's Perpetual revolution, we must specifically analyze what technically changed. Before Hendrix, guitarists played the guitar. After Hendrix, they played the amplifier as instrument. This distinction is crucial. Hendrix demonstrated that the sound of an electric guitar is created through the complete interaction of fingers on strings, magnetic pickups, cables, effects pedals, tube amplifier, speaker, ears. Each element is part of the whole instrument. His specific techniques became part of the standard vocabulary of rock. Controlled feedback, formerly a mistake, now an expressive tool. Hendrix demonstrated how to generate feedback on specific tones, how to sustain it, how to transform it into melody. Distortion as timbre, not just loud volume, but saturation as an intentional sound color. Different levels of distortion for different emotions. Expressive use of the tremolo bar. Hendrix used the whammy bar not only for subtle vibrato but for dramatic dive bombs, to create siren effects, for expressive microtonality. Hybrid chords. His technique of wrapping his thumb around the fretboard allowed for chord voicings impossible with conventional technique. These chords, now called Hendrix chords, became part of the standard rock vocabulary. The 70s would be dominated by guitarists trying to process the Hendrix revolution. Eric Clapton, who survived the era in which Hendrix shone, consciously evolved toward a more blues-based, less pyrotechnic style. As if he recognized that technically competing with Hendrix's ghost was futile. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin incorporated Hendrix's lessons on production and effects. Whole Lotta Love, with its psychedelic middle section, is unthinkable without Electric Ladyland. Page's use of the theremin, echo effects, and studio textures were directly influenced by Hendrix's experiments. Jeff Beck, who played alongside Hendrix in London clubs, is moving towards instrumental jazz rock. He acknowledges that Hendrix perfected blues rock, Beck must find new territory. Deep Purple's Ritchie Blackmore developed a more classical technique, based more on Baroque minor scales. But his use of distortion and massive volume is pure Hendrix heritage. There's a direct line from Hendrix to heavy metal. Black Sabbath, formed in 1968, listened obsessively to Hendrix's early albums. Tony Iommi, their guitarist, adopted Hendrix's heavy distortion and massive volume but darkened it, made it more ominous. Hendrix's Purple Haze riff, that dissonant tritone interval, historically called diabolus in musica, became a model for metal riffs. Hendrix's willingness to explore dissonance, to not resolve harmonic tensions in the traditional way, gave metal permission to be more chromatic, darker. Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, the foundational triad of hard rock and metal, are all processing the lessons of Hendrix. They are expanding on what he started. But Hendrix's influence is not limited to rock. His impact on black music is profound but frequently ignored by rock historians. George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic directly adopted Hendrix's sonic aesthetic. Eddie Hazel, guitarist for Funkadelic, was essentially a disciple of Hendrix. His 10-minute solo on Maggot Brain, 1971, is a direct dialogue with the spirit of Hendrix, emotional, distorted, transcendent. In the 1980s, Prince synthesized Hendrix with funk, pop, and rock in one of the most successful fusions in the history of popular music. Prince played left-handed guitar like Hendrix, although Prince was ambidextrous. His androgynous style, his open sexuality, his technical virtuosity, all echoed Hendrix. In the 90s, Lenny Kravitz would consciously revive Hendrix's aesthetic, combining it with modern sensibilities. The effects pedal industry exploded after Hendrix. Manufacturers recognized a massive market for devices that would allow ordinary guitarists to approach the Hendrix sound. The wah pedal, popularized by Hendrix, becomes standard. The Dunlop Cry Baby becomes an iconic model used by generations. Distortion pedals are proliferating. Boss, Ibanez, Electro-Harmonix, Proco, all manufacture variations seeking to capture Hendrix's signature distortion. The Proco Rat, the Ibanez Tube Screamer, legendary pedals designed to approximate the tones Hendrix achieved with amplifiers pushed to their limits. The Univibe, the modulation effect Hendrix used to create a rotating sound, has become a holy grail for collectors. Replicas and variations have appeared for decades. Marshall amplifiers became the industry standard. Hendrix made Marshall stacks, two cabinets stacked with a head, the iconic image of rock guitar. Every aspiring guitarist wants that black tower of British power. With Hendrix's death, the inevitable process of mythologization begins. True stories blend with exaggerations. Legends intertwine with facts. Did Hendrix really tune his guitar between songs using only his ear, without a tuner? Yes, musicians who played with him confirm it. His ear was extraordinarily accurate. Is it true that he could play guitar with his teeth better than most guitarists with their fingers? Not exactly. His dental technique was limited to single notes and bends. It was an impressive spectacle, but musically limited. The myth is exaggerated. Did Hendrix make a pact with the devil at crossroads like the blues legend Robert Johnson? Obviously not. But the legend persists because the level of his skill seems supernatural. People look for magical explanations for exceptional talent. Did he sleep with his guitar? According to people close to him, frequently. He would take it to bed, hug it as he fell asleep. It wasn't a mystical ritual. It was simply the obsession of someone for whom music was life. But Hendrix's legacy creates a specific problem: generations of imitators who copy his style without understanding its substance. The 70s and 80s saw a parade of guitarists in psychedelic attire, with afros, playing upside-down Stratocasters and blasting loudly with heavy distortion. But most lacked Hendrix's musicianship, his sense of space, his knowledge of when not to play. Hendrix used extended technique, playing behind his head, with his teeth, with a flaming guitar, only when it served the music or the theatrical moment. Imitators use tricks as a substitute for musical substance. The result is paradoxical. Hendrix expanded the possibilities of the guitar, But many of his followers reduced those possibilities to a predictable formula. Volume plus distortion plus long solos equals Hendrix. But without the sensitivity, it's just technically competent noise. During the 70s and 80s, there was a period when some music critics turned against Hendrix's legacy. They accused him of having started the guitar hero culture, the cult of technical virtuosity that would eventually lead to the excesses of progressive rock and hair metal in the 80s. The punk rock of 1977 was partly a reaction against excessive virtuosity. The Sex Pistols and The Clash deliberately played simple chords. Technique was suspect. Attitude was everything. But even many punk guitarists secretly admire Hendrix. Because Hendrix was never just about technique. He was about attitude too. He was about rebellion. He was about destroying and rebuilding rules. By the 1990s, the critical consensus was re-established. Hendrix wasn't the problem. The mediocre imitators were the problem. The original master remained untouchable. Beyond guitar technique, Hendrix's legacy in studio production is immense. His work with Eddie Kramer established precedents for the creative use of the studio as a compositional tool. The idea that studio recording is not merely documentation of a performance, but the creation of unique art that cannot exist live. The use of stereo panning in Electric Ladyland, instruments jumping between left and right speakers, becomes standard technique. Multitrack recording, where one person plays all the guitar parts, becomes commonplace. The tape reversal technique that Hendrix used for psychedelic effects inspired the Beatles in their own experiments. Tomorrow Never Knows and Strawberry Fields Forever applied similar techniques to a different context. Modern producers such as Butch Vig, who produced Nirvana's Nevermind, Rick Rubin, Nigel Godrich, all cite Hendrix as an influence on their studio approach as a creative palette. When digital technology revolutionized music in the 80s and 90s, the spirit of Hendrix persisted. Digital multi-effects processors attempt to replicate his sound chain. Devices like the Line 6 Pod, Kemper Profiler, and AxeFX all seek to digitally model Marshall amplifiers pushed to their limits, vintage pedals, and the entire chain Hendrix used. Digital recording software like Pro Tools allows for edits impossible in the analog era. But the principle is the same as Hendrix practiced. The studio is a tool for composition, not just documentation. Virtual guitars in video games like Guitar Hero introduce Hendrix's songs to new generations. Children who never lived through the 60s learn his riffs and feel the satisfaction of playing his patterns. But there is an element of Hendrix's legacy that transcends technique and technology, his almost spiritual approach to music. Hendrix spoke of music as a cosmic force, as a connection to something greater than himself. This wasn't empty hippie rhetoric. It was a genuine belief that sound could alter consciousness, open perceptual doors, heal, or transform. This attitude directly influences musicians seeking transcendence through sound. Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead, who played with Hendrix, adopts a similar approach to jamming as collective meditation. Phish's extended jams in the 1990s are direct descendants of Hendrix's exploration of sound. Trance-electronic music, with its search for altered states through repetition and accumulation, is a distant cousin of Hendrix's psychedelic jams. As the decades go by, cultural institutions that initially ignored or looked down on Hendrix embrace him. 1992. Hendrix is inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. 1993. The United States issues a postage stamp with his image. 2003. Rolling Stone magazine names him the best guitarist of all time in a poll of professional musicians and critics. 2009. The Smithsonian Institution acquires his Woodstock guitar, the white Stratocaster with which he played the national anthem, as an artifact of national cultural significance. The irony is palpable. The musician who died in debt, exhausted, and marginalized by some communities is now an official national treasure. The cultural establishment that ignored him now canonizes him. For decades after his death, The trickle of new Hendrix releases continued. Rehearsal recordings, informal jams, and alternative versions of well-known songs. Some are revealing. Valleys of Neptune, released 2010, contains strong material from 1969 that shows a more developed funk direction. Both Sides of the Sky, 2018, features the last recorded collaboration between Hendrix and Stephen Stills, a version of Joni Mitchell's Woodstock that is simultaneously beautiful and painfully incomplete. But there is also exploitation, redundant compilations, inferior material released solely to capitalize on his name, remastered versions that replace original mixes with modern interpretations that betray Hendrix's intentions. The Hendrix family eventually regained control and established higher standards. But the damage from decades of exploitation affected his legacy. If Hendrix had lived, what would he have done? His latest recordings suggest a move towards jazz rock, funk, and more sophisticated composition. He mentioned wanting to work with an orchestra. He talked about formally studying music theory. Some speculate that he collaborated with Miles Davis on fusion projects. It would have been a meeting of titans, two revolutionaries of their respective instruments. Others imagine that he succumbed to addiction or became irrelevant as the musical climate of the 70s changed. Punk, disco, new wave, all represented different aesthetics. But this is empty speculation. The reality is that Hendrix died at his artistic peak, leaving behind an incomplete but brilliant body of work. Beyond all technical analysis, all historical categorization, all constructed mythology, there is a simple truth about Jimi Hendrix. He picked up an instrument, the electric guitar, and proved he could do infinitely more than anyone imagined. Not through brute force or superficial tricks, but through a deep understanding that electric sound is malleable material. He combined African-American blues heritage with avant-garde European experimentation. He combined technical virtuosity with emotional vulnerability. He combined theatrical spectacle with artistic seriousness. And he did it in just 4 years of his recording career. The fire he lit in Monterey never went out. It continues to burn in every guitarist who pushes boundaries, in every producer who treats the studio as an instrument, in every musician who recognizes that technique should serve emotion, not replace it. Hendrix's revolution is perpetual because it wasn't just technical evolution. It was an expansion of imagination about what music can be. Bethel, New York. August 2019. The site of the Woodstock Festival, now a museum and historic site. Thousands gather to commemorate the 50th anniversary. Giant screens project footage from the original festival. When Hendrix appears playing the national anthem, the crowd falls into reverent silence. 50 years. Generations who weren't even born when it happened watch the grainy image of a man and his guitar making a statement that still resonates. The guitarists present, some in their 70s, some barely teenagers, recognize that moment as a cornerstone. Before Hendrix, after Hendrix. The dividing line remains clear. But what is the ultimate lesson of Jimi Hendrix? What does his story teach us about art, about ambition, about the cost of genius? The answer isn't simple. It's not a straightforward moral or practical advice. Hendrix proved that breaking rules requires first understanding the rules. He wasn't an ignorant iconoclast. He had a deep understanding of traditional blues, grasped harmonic structure, and had played thousands of hours in conventional formats. His innovation stemmed from mastery, not ignorance. He demonstrated that technique without emotion is empty, but emotion without technique is powerless. You need both. Virtuosity should serve expression, not replace it. He proved that timing is everything. He arrived precisely when technology, more powerful amplifiers, primitive effects, multi-track recording, made his ideas possible. A decade earlier, impossible. A decade later, no longer radical. And it tragically demonstrated that the system that elevates geniuses often destroys them. That massive success without a support structure is dangerous. That the constant pressure to surpass your own innovation is unsustainable. There is a direct lineage of guitarists who carried the torch after Hendrix. Stevie Ray Vaughan, 1954 to 1990, was the most obvious heir. Texas blues rock with Hendrix-esque intensity. His album, Texas Flood, 1983, is a conscious revival of Hendrix's aesthetic for the 1980s. His death in a helicopter crash at the age of 35 is a painful echo of geniuses cut short. Eddie Van Halen, 1955 to 2020, took Hendrix's technique and accelerated it, making it more athletic. His tapping technique, striking the fretboard with the fingers of his right hand, wasn't invented by Hendrix, but the spirit of experimentation, of finding new guitar sounds, is pure Hendrix heritage. Prince, 1958 to 2016, synthesized Hendrix with funk and pop in a way that created something entirely new yet unmistakably connected. His live performance of Purple Rain is a direct dialogue with the spirit of Hendrix, guitar playing as a collective emotional catharsis. They all died relatively young. Van Halen at 65, Prince at 57, Vaughan at 35. As if the intensity that connected them to Hendrix also came at a physical cost. But Hendrix's influence extends beyond obvious rock guitar. Hip-hop producers constantly sample Hendrix's drum breaks. The groove of Voodoo Child, Slight Return, appears in countless rap tracks. The spirit of technical innovation, of pushing equipment beyond its intended use, is shared between Hendrix and hip-hop pioneers. Electronic music, DJs and producers recognize Hendrix as a proto-sonic experimenter. His manipulation of feedback, his use of effects, his treatment of the studio as an instrument, all foreshadow electronic music. Aphex Twin, Squarepusher, and IDM artists cite Hendrix as a conceptual inspiration. Extreme metal, death metal and black metal bands that push distortion to extreme limits are in direct lineage from Hendrix. He proved that distortion can be a legitimate expressive tool, not just a mistake. Washington, D.C. The Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. On permanent display, the white Fender Stratocaster that Hendrix played at Woodstock. The guitar shows where the finish is worn where his right arm rested, there are burn marks where cigarettes rested on the headstock, and the nut adjustments are worn from constant tuning. Visitors observe in silence. It is a sacred object in a secular museum. The guitar that played the anthem in the storm. The instrument that channeled a defining cultural moment. Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft and a collector of Hendrix memorabilia, acquired it in 2098 for $2 million. He eventually donated it to the Smithsonian. It now belongs to the nation, preserved as an artifact of historical significance. Greenwich Village, New York. Electric Lady Studios is still operating more than 50 years after it was built. The distinctive curved walls remain. The psychedelic aesthetic has been preserved. But the equipment is modern. Digital consoles, Pro Tools, technology Hendrix never imagined. Contemporary artists record there specifically because of the historical connection. Patti Smith recorded there. The Strokes. Daft Punk used the studio for Random Access Memories. Adele recorded parts of 21 there. Everyone is looking for something of Hendrix's spirit, as if the place itself held creative energy. As if standing where he stood could transmit some of his vision. It's superstition, obviously. But artists thrive on ritual and symbolism. And if believing in the ghost of Hendrix helps create courageous music, then the myth serves a practical purpose. Every few years, the Hendrix family organizes the Experience Hendrix Tour, a traveling tribute concert with multiple guitarists performing his music. Billy Cox, bassist who played with Hendrix in Band of Gypsies, anchors the house band. Guitarists rotate: Buddy Guy, Johnny Lang, Zakk Wylde, Doyle Bramhall II, Kenny Wayne Shepherd. Each guitarist brings their own interpretation. Some try to replicate faithfully. Others completely reimagine. Little Wing becomes smooth jazz. Voodoo Child becomes extreme metal. The Wind Cries Mary becomes country rock. The variations demonstrate the robustness of Hendrix's compositions. They are strong enough to withstand radical reinterpretation. They are not merely vehicles for guitar virtuosity. They are genuine songs with solid emotional architecture. In 2025, technology can finally approach what Hendrix did intuitively. Artificial intelligence software can analyze your solos, identify patterns, and suggest fingerings. Amplifier modeling can digitally replicate your exact signal chain. Virtual reality allows 4 lessons with a Hendrix avatar. But something is lost in translation. Technology captures the technique but not the intention. It can replicate notes but not the moment of inspiration that created them. There is a central paradox. Hendrix was a master of technology, but his genius was profoundly human. It was the specific combination of his biography, his cultural moment, his individual psychology, and his unique physical characteristics. You can learn his techniques. You can buy his equipment. You can study his theory. But you can't be Jimi Hendrix because there was only one. Internet forums, guitar subreddits, Facebook groups dedicated to Hendrix, endless discussions. Was he really the greatest guitarist of all time? His technique was inferior to Yngwie Malmsteen or Steve Vai. But the overrated Eddie Van Halen was more innovative. Without Hendrix, there would be no Van Halen. The conversation never ends because there's no objective answer. The best is a meaningless category in art. There are only different kinds of excellence. Hendrix was the most innovative of his time. He was the most influential in expanding the vocabulary of rock guitar. He was the most effective at synthesizing technique with emotion. Was he the best? The question is incorrect. It was Hendrix. And that was enough to change everything. Seattle maintains multiple Hendrix sites. His grave at Greenwood Memorial Park receives constant visitors. Fans leave guitar picks, flowers, and notes. The memorial was expanded in 2003, a large structure with a dome, granite columns, and etched photographs. London has a blue plaque at number 23 Brook Street, Mayfair, the apartment where he lived in 1968 to 1969. It shared a building with the former residence of George Frederick Handel. 2 musical innovators, separated by 200 years, under the same roof. The site of Café Wa? In Greenwich Village, where Chas Chandler discovered him, still exists as a live music club. Fans make pilgrimages. They touch these places like relics. They seek a tangible connection with the man they only know through recordings and grainy footage. If Hendrix could see his legacy, what would he think? He probably would have been uncomfortable with the adoration. He was always ambivalent about fame. He wanted his music to be heard, but he didn't want to be an icon. "I just want to be remembered as a guitarist who tried something different," he said in one of his last interviews. He achieved that, and much more. But perhaps the most honest statement of his legacy comes from Miles Davis, who said after his death, "Hendrix could play one note and make you cry. That's all you need to know." We return to the fire. Monterey, June of 1967. The guitar ablaze. Hendrix kneeling before the flames. It wasn't just a spectacle. It was a ritual of transformation. It was the symbolic death of the old order and the birth of the new. It was a declaration that rock and roll as it existed before was no longer enough. That fire never truly went out. It continues to burn in every musician who refuses to accept limitations. In every artist who treats their instrument as uncharted territory. In every person who understands that art requires risk. Hendrix lived only 27 years. He recorded professionally for just 4. He released only 3 studio albums during his lifetime. But in that compressed time, he fundamentally changed what was possible in popular music. He expanded the sonic vocabulary of his era. He created a template for how art and technology can merge. So how did Jimi Hendrix redefine rock forever? Through the understanding that limits are illusory. That rules exist to be questioned. That the electric guitar is not an instrument with fixed capabilities but an infinite territory for exploration. by demonstrating that technical virtuosity and emotional depth are not opposites but necessary complements. By refusing to remain in comfortable categories, not purely blues, not purely rock, not purely psychedelia, but a synthesis that created something entirely new. Through the courage to be himself in an era that demanded conformity. A black man playing white music. A virtuoso performing for hippie audiences. A serious artist within the commercial entertainment format. There is one final detail that defines Hendrix. He never stopped learning. He never claimed complete mastery. In his last interviews, he spoke of wanting to study music theory. Of wanting to formally understand what he did intuitively. At 27, with 3 groundbreaking albums completed, he still considered himself a student. That humility, that willingness to remain eternally in learning mode, is perhaps his most important lesson. Genius is not an achieved destination. It is a continuous process of exploration. Today, more than 50 years after his death, Hendrix's music sounds strangely contemporary. It doesn't sound dated in the way that much of the rock from the 60s does. Voodoo Child, Slight Return, can be played on the radio alongside modern rock without sounding like a historical relic. Little Wing feels timeless. All Along the Watchtower is an eternal standard. This is because Hendrix didn't chase trends. He created sounds from his emotional core. Fashion changes. Technology evolves. But human emotion, pain, joy, confusion, ecstasy, remains constant. His music endures because it speaks of universal human truths through a language he invented. Imagine the last chord Jimi Hendrix played. Somewhere in London, in his final days, at an informal jam session or private rehearsal. The last vibration of strings beneath his fingers. The last amplified sound he created. We don't know what it was. It wasn't documented. It was lost in time like millions of other musical moments. But metaphorically, that chord never stopped resonating. It expanded outward like ripples on water. It touched Miles Davis, Eddie Van Halen, Prince. It touched hip-hop producers, metal guitarists, electronic musicians. It continues to expand. Every time a young guitarist plugs a Stratocaster into an amplifier and cranks it up, searching for that sound they heard in their head. Every time a producer treats the studio as a creative canvas. Every time an artist rejects limitations and risks failure by pursuing a unique vision. The chord continues to resonate. Jimi Hendrix redefined rock forever not through a single trick or technique. He redefined it by demonstrating that art requires total courage. It requires a willingness to burn the past to create the future. He set a guitar on fire on a Californian stage. And that fire never stopped burning.